Joey, it was really such an honor to have you contribute to the study Bible. You bring a lot of background as a man of the church and also as an academic, and that really came through in your study notes. But tell us, like, who you are, where do you teach, and how did you get into biblical scholarship?
Yeah, well, I'm the Craig L. Blomberg Chair of New Testament at Denver Seminary. I've always had that desire to have the mind of a scholar and the heart of a pastor. And so from even very, very beginning, I went to school at Ouachita Baptist University, and that was kind of instilled that we need those people that can build the bridge between the academy and the church. And so because of that, I've always had one foot in scholarship and one foot in ministry. I have a major heart for what you're doing with this project. As you know, I spent numerous years in inner city ministry in Houston, Texas, working with the down and out and the multicultural and those who are a little bit different than what we usually think about, coming from my background at least. Being in Denver, as you know, there's a lot of weed that's around. And so when we started going to church at Denver, there was a place where as soon as the service was over with, we called it the Well, and we would have those experiencing homelessness would come in, and we would eat with them and serve them. And often associated with that community, and just Denver in general, is that reek, that smell of marijuana. And so we'd come out of church every day, and it would just kind of hit us in the face. And a couple of weeks later, we were downtown Denver, and someone had lit up and walked by, and my youngest smells it. And he looks at the guy and says, "It smells like church out here." And I loved it because, yeah, this is kind of what church should smell like. I mean, and often in my background growing up, church smelled more like potpourri. And I appreciate my background and all that it gave me, but it didn't. There's a different smell of church that's out there than the potpourri that many of us are used to. And I think what the Upside Down Bible is doing is it's smelling like church for those who don't know the potpourri smell of the Baptist world that I grew up in.
So it's a desanitized version of the text, and that is something that as you study the Bible in depthly and really start asking harder questions, and you have these more raw life experiences, raw ministry experiences, you begin to see that the New Testament is a very raw, real, honest, sometimes edgy document.
Right.
So you wrote the study notes for a bunch of half the New Testament, so Matthew through Second Thessalonians. What are some, like, I guess maybe passages that stand out, or themes or events that stand out anywhere in that section that does exemplify what you're getting at, that this is not a sanitized portrait of Christianity. This is a very real portrait of real people.
There's so many different places I'll go. We'll start at the beginning with Matthew's genealogy. I mean, often we just quickly rush through the genealogy. So-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so. It's like the Elvis song, whole lot of begetting going on. But even then, at the beginning of that, as Matthew makes that beautiful bridge between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament, he includes women in this genealogy, which was more unusual during this time. Like, look at Chronicles, for example, in comparison. But the women that he chooses, they're not the great, holy, beautiful women, but instead we have Tamar. We look at the story of Judah and Tamar. We have Rahab and her past. We have Uriah's wife. We have, I'm missing, Ruth, that's in there. And these are women that have kind of shady backgrounds associated with them. And Matthew, at the very beginning, puts these women who are probably Gentiles at the very beginning to show that the gospel, it doesn't just smell like potpourri, that it is raw. And so at the very beginning, we see that this opens up the story to Mary and kind of her seemingly shady experience that's happening. And so even right there at the very beginning, it's not just for these men and these great holy people, but Jesus is shady. Jesus' family tree is a bit shady.
Well, and Mary, you think Mary's, this holy person, and I think she was.
Yeah.
But think about the reputation she would have gotten when she says, "Oh, I didn't do this. God did this to me." When she's pregnant, and the shame that would have surrounded that, or even I'm thinking of the disciples, the 12 apostles.
Yeah.
I mean, their characters are not squeaky clean. Can you tell us a bit more about maybe some of these disciples?
Yeah, well, the Sons of Thunder, those are the kind of guys I'd like to hang out with. Yeah, so I'm not sure the Sons of Thunder would be welcomed at ETS. And going back to Mary, you have this, a textual variant where when Gabriel comes and speaks to her, in the Greek, there's a phrase that says, "I don't give a darn about my reputation." I'm just kidding. That's a joke. It's not about her reputation. Instead, she's come to please the Lord. And so we see that she doesn't care the opinion of men. Instead, she has come to be a servant of the Lord. But yeah, so we see these disciples. We see that not only are they Galileans, would be kind of the country bumpkins, uneducated, and it's beautiful. And we see this even when Luke gives us this picture of Peter and John before the Sanhedrin, before the religious leaders, and they look at these guys like, how do these guys know so much? You know, they're from Galilee. We hear their accent. And even this with Peter, as he's standing before the fire, the girl's like, man, you got to be, you know, from way out of there. And so it's beautiful that Jesus chose this motley crew of the people that are unexpected. There's the old 90s song, Christian song. I don't know a lot of them, but this is one that I know. But he believes in lost causes because he believes in me. I think it's maybe Phillips, Craig, and Dean. Okay. Do you remember that? It's very potpourri type music. Yeah. But yeah, so it's beautiful that Jesus chose these lost causes in order to send them out in the Great Commission to the world.
This might be a hard question. Okay. But do you have a favorite scene in any of the Gospels, in the life of Jesus? Any scene that just you keep coming back to? You know,
so many. Yeah. Gosh, it's almost like asking me who's my favorite child, right? Yeah, favorite scene.
How about you've done a lot of work in Matthew in particular? Let me, is there, something in Matthew that
maybe the Canaanite woman? Yeah,
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah, so the Canaanite woman, stay away from me. Yeah, so this Canaanite woman comes, and again, she wants Jesus to heal her child. And Jesus says, maybe not even speaking to her, it's not right to give what belongs to the children to the dogs. And she was like, yeah, but even the dogs get the crumbs. And at this point, Jesus is amazed at her faith. And so for someone to amaze Jesus with their faith, and Jesus says, I haven't seen faith like this in all of Israel, and especially from a Canaanite woman, which again Matthew continues to connect us back to this Old Testament. We think of Canaanite woman, we think of Jezebel. This is even a Jezebel in her faith, and so this continues to reverberate that motif in Matthew, that those who are outcast and downcast, the ones we least expected, they're going to be the ones that come from the east and the west and sit at the table of Abraham. And it's just absolutely beautiful because I would be that Canaanite woman. I am the one that is just begging for the crumbs that fall from the children's table. And so just the beauty of that and that woman's faith that stands in contrast to even the apostles in like Matthew 17, where Jesus is like, how long do I have to be with you guys? As he comes down because they can't cast out the demon. And Matthew's also the one who tells us that Jesus' name is going to be Emmanuel. That's only in Matthew's gospel, which is funny because Gabriel doesn't say that. So where does Matthew get this? Like, his name's supposed to be Jesus because he's going to save his people from their sins. And Matthew's like, see, his name is Emmanuel, which means God with us. And so here, Jesus is not just who saves us, but he saves us by being Emmanuel. And then in Matthew 17, where Emmanuel says, how long do I have to be with you? It's bad when God with us wants to say, how much longer do I have to be with you? So seeing the faith of the centurion, seeing the faith of the Canaanite woman, Syrophoenician woman in the other gospel, but to see how those are the ones that give us this example on how the gospel is for those who don't smell like potpourri, coming to that metaphor.
And that fits, the title of the study Bible, this upside down kingdom study Bible, getting at, that the way of the kingdom is often very different and seemingly backwards to the ways of the world. And there's, I don't know, there's so many different directions we can go. There's many themes that exemplify that. But is there maybe one or two themes in particular that you trace either in the Gospels or in the letters that exemplify this kind of very countercultural expression of living that Christ and the apostles advocate for?
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that I'm really a Paul guy. So this is one thing that I love that we see when Paul and Peter and James come together at the Jerusalem Council. They're kicking it at J-Town, and they're trying to figure out the details and how to navigate the church from there forth. And then Paul tells us about this in Galatians, and he gets really excited. He says, but last of all, they told me to make sure that I took care of the poor. And Paul was like, yes, 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 yes. That's exactly what I wanted to do. And so we see the New Testament kissing these James and Peter and Paul and John with this desire of like, hey, make sure that no matter what we do, that we take care of the poor. And so we see that burden and that passion, that desire that continues to be a golden strand throughout the New Testament. And sometimes it's something that we forget. We get so caught up in the theology or soteriology or ecclesiology, but I want it to be, and hopefully this Bible will help instill that when we hear, don't forget to think about the poor and take care of the poor, that we're just like, yeah. And so we see that, of course, the upside down idea comes straight from Scripture, where Luke is telling us that coming from an outsider, right? The voice of the outsider, like, hey, these guys are turning the world upside down. And so we see that through Luke's gospel as well. And it just makes sense that Luke and Paul were buddies. And I could just see them sitting around having a pint or a cup of coffee and like, the poor, let's take care of the poor. The gospel is for the shepherds. The gospels are for, these country bumpkins. The gospels are for it's for the Canaanite woman. And so, I think once you put those lenses on of the marginalized and outcast, you just see it page after page after page. And even James is going to come. And I know I didn't do James, but, pure and undefiled religion. I like my religion like my coffee. Undefiled, unadulterated is to keep yourself pure and to take care of orphans and widows. And orphans and widows, of course, is a Hendiadys or a merism, where it's saying take care of those who are helpless. And so the Upside Down Bible, it's not something new. Instead, it seems to be underlining and underscoring what was at the top of the heart of the apostles.
Yeah. And so going back to the poverty piece, I mean, it's something that often it kind of gets lost in the cracks, but the Jerusalem collection is what it's called, where Paul went around, collecting money from wealthier Gentile churches because the poor Jewish believers in Jerusalem fell upon hard times. And he talks about this in many different places.
Yeah, we have
right?
it in 2 Corinthians. He has 2 entire chapters that are dedicated to it in 2 Corinthians. But and I love what he does with the Corinthians is that he was like, these Macedonians, the Philippians, they gave a lot more money and they don't have nearly as much money as you do. And so we have Paul having this great burden, and some think that, and this may be beyond what you want to talk about, but some people believe that Paul had this idea that once he brought these gifts from the Gentiles into Jerusalem, that was going to lead to more racial reconciliation. It was going to be kind of like the Zion type picture where the Gentiles are bringing gifts to Jerusalem. And so it may be that not only did Paul have this great heart to take care of the poor in Jerusalem because of the famine that is happening, but connected with that was this is bringing the Gentile, the non-Jewish church, and the Jewish church together, which again goes back to that passage in Galatians. Not only was Paul saying, let's take care of the poor, but he says before that I had to present my gospel to these pillars, these so-called pillars, lest I run my race in vain. And right before, Paul's like, hey, my gospel came from God, only God, nothing but God, so help me. But then at the same time, he takes it to Peter and James for approval. So why does he do this? What does it mean to run the race in vain? And I think for Paul, if his gospel, even though it is solely from the Lord, not from an angel, this is his gospel through which God's going to judge the world, he still would have seen it running in vain if it led a rift, a yawn, a chasm between the Jewish church and the Gentile church. And so Paul's heart wasn't just for the poor, but it was also to take care, to tear down those walls of racism and prejudice that is there. And so I think 2 great pillars, when Paul confronts the pillars, is taking care of the poor and also bringing unity, cultural unity in the church.
I think that's at the end of Romans 15, where he talks about the collection, the Jerusalem collection, but it is very much in this context of the Jew-Gentile reconciliation. At the climax of a letter that's all about Jew and Gentile coming together.
Even the holy kiss. I mean, we made jokes about it growing up in youth group, right? So what's the difference between a holy kiss and an unholy kiss? Probably about 3 seconds. But this idea of a holy kiss is where slaves and slave masters are giving each other a holy kiss.
Oh, wow.
Men and women are giving, Jews and Gentiles are giving each other a holy kiss. And so that beautiful picture, a holy kiss wasn't a punchline. Instead, there was this great picture of the unity that has been brought only about through the blood of Jesus Christ.
Now, the other theme that comes to my mind is just how the New Testament treats women. can you give us an example of how there's an upside down nature in,
Yeah.
the broader culture at the time, how women were treated, and how the New Testament
Yeah.
was about it quite differently?
Yeah. Well, I love what Luke does with Mary and Martha, where Martha's busy and upset about many things, but Mary has taken the position as a disciple. She's sitting under the feet of a rabbi, and you could almost see some of the men being uncomfortable, like, wait, no, the men sit under the feet of a rabbi. But now here Mary is taking that place, and Jesus looks at her and says, she has chosen what is right. And so that beautiful aspect. We could talk about Paul's and Priscilla and Aquila, and Paul allowing Phoebe to be the first reader of Romans. We see that over and over again. I mean, and I love me some Galatians, as you know, just second to Romans. But when Paul comes and says there's neither male nor female, it's just such a radical statement. And so when Paul talks about the new creation, with that new creation, it's no longer Jew or Gentile. It's no longer male nor female. It's no longer barbarian, Scythian, slave or free. But there's this huge new creation. And so often in the potpourri smelling church that I grew up in, and again, I love potpourri, don't get me wrong, I'm not being that, but in the potpourri, we focus just on the justification by faith that's there. And definitely it's a beautiful description of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But I would see the justification of faith by faith and put at least alongside of, if not above, this idea of new creation. And that new creation doesn't just turn the world upside down. It renews. It's a metamorphosis of creation that makes us look at everyone else differently, because now we're not just in the image of God as God's image bearers, but now we are in the image of Jesus Christ. And so as we share in his sufferings in this world, we'll also share in his glory.
That's good. One of the values going into the study Bible was diversity. So ethnic diversity, gender diversity, denominational, theological diversity. There could be a unhealthy theological diversity in some settings, but I think we tried to foster healthy theological diversity. I would love to hear from you why, because I know you share the same passion for that. Like, why do you think that's important for even like to get a diverse array of contributors to a study Bible like this? We could have just gotten like just a one denomination, one kind of person, one kind of scholar, whatever. But we said we don't want to do that.
Right.
Why is that an important part of this project?
Right. Well, thank you first of all for allowing me to be your diversity hire and coming and sharing with this. No, I have a huge burden for just the multicultural church. I think what we see in Revelation, with every tongue and every tribe and every nation coming together around the throne, is not just meant to be something far, far away in the future when we're waiting for. I think we're supposed to be bringing that into the world here and now. And that only happens when we have those voices. God's voice is not one color. It's not one nation. It's not one gender. God is he is spirit, and he has created us all in his images. And so we need to hear those voices again and again and again. I'm so thankful for my friends in the majority world. I'm so thankful for the women that come and show me that I've been reading this passage all around. And so exegesis is best done in community. And it's best done in a diverse community with different denominations and different people coming together, pointing out aspects because of the Spirit of God inside of them and their lenses and their cultural background that just shows me so much more that I've never seen before, and I probably wouldn't have seen were it not for my brothers and sisters that aren't like me.
Yeah. Yeah, you weren't a diversity hire, but as a white man, you are in the minority, of the contributors, actually, in the study Bible, which might be the most
I thought it was because
unique.
I was a vegan. I thought it was I was a vegan hire. Yeah.
One final question. So, I mean, you've been studying the New Testament for a long time. So this is not anything new, going in and writing summary, introductions to these various books. But in your study, in your writing of these notes, is there anything that you kind of discovered or something that you hadn't really appreciated before writing these notes?
With each note, I was like, man, Matthew's my favorite. And then I get to Mark, and I see how Mark is talking to the exiles, those who've been pressed by the Roman government. I'm like, no, Mark is my favorite. And I get to Luke, and it's like the shepherds, and you get the voices of the women. I'm like, no, Luke is my favorite. And then you get to John, and John's talking about those who have just had church trauma and the religious leaders that are like, John is my favorite. And so I think I realize how it just underlines even more for me just how beautiful God's word is, and just the different facets that continue to turn the world upside down that's there. But I think that I noticed even more so the imperial critical theme that seems to be throughout all of those. And so are at least a minor note in each one of those, if not a higher note. And so that was a kind of a cool thing that brings it together, because often in the Greco-Roman world, the marginalized and the exiled and the poor and the powerless were not part of the Roman Empire as well. And so some of these subtle, sometimes not so subtle, pushback at the Roman Empire, because the kingdom of God is supposed to be much different.
Well, we want to thank you so much for your contribution. I mean, I knew, bringing you on, that I was going to get a lot of academic precision. What I love most is how you intertwine that with a strong, clear pastoral heart. And that, it's hard to get, it'd be easy to get a bunch of good scholars. It'd be easy to get a bunch of good writers, but to get people who can do both was not easy. And your contribution was truly, truly impactful. So thank you so much for contributing to the Upside Down Kingdom Study Bible.
Thanks.